Welcome to the number 10 edition. We hit double digits. Welcome to number 10 of the Player to Coach pod. We have a special episode today. We have a finals recap / accountability podcast. So we're going to be doing something today that national media doesn't always do. We're going to be doing something today that people who watch national media wish would happen more. We are going to hold accountable the people who are making the predictions in sports. This doesn't always happen. There's talking heads that seem to have undefeated records somehow. There's always stipulations. There's never accountability that's held. And we're not going to be that media. Okay? That's not going to be us. No matter how big or small we become one day, we're not going to be that. So, for clarity, Jordan predicted, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago when we did that pod, probably 3 weeks ago now, beginning of the finals. Jordan predicted Warriors in 6.
You bet I did.
He did. So
Right.
we're not only going to bring that to light, we're going to bring to light that I predicted Celtics in 7. I was disappointed in their effort. I was disappointed in their execution. I don't know why this one bothered me so much. I don't really care about either team. Like, I don't have a rooting interest in either one of these. So maybe it was just that now that we're starting a podcast, and I would like to have started out 1-0. Didn't happen, but we accept it. We're going to analyze it. We're going to move on. It's going to be that simple. Okay, so we got that out of the way. I want to hear your big takeaway from just Game 6, because there's a lot that happened at various points in the game. It was like, wow, the Celtics are going to dominate this game, and we're going back to Golden State. And then at various points, we're like, wow, the Warriors might beat them by 50. So I want to see kind of how your experience was watching the game, what you thought, just kind of big takeaways.
I think anyone that actually watches like basketball in general, but especially the NBA, knows that it's a game of runs. So I think it's funny when people are like, "Uh-oh, Warriors are going to get killed," and they start down 15-2. It's like, no, they're not. That's only a few minutes into the game. They're lethal from the 3-point line and can score and can lock in and get stops. So the game wasn't like out of hand yet or anything. It was way too early for that to happen. So I thought that was an initial takeaway that a lot of people tend to look at very soon. It's like, oh, this is going to be a blowout. But it clearly wasn't, considering the run that they went on after that before halftime. Um, my biggest takeaway besides that is that um, not that he needed to solidify anything, but Steph Curry is um, probably like definitely, yeah, he's definitely in the top 10 at this point all time.
I
Um,
agree.
People are going to argue that, right? People are going to argue. But when you are labeled as the best shooter that God's ever created, um, you have 4 titles, um, multiple All Star appearances, multiple awards won now with MVPs, whether that's in the regular season or the finals. And he's been with one team his whole career. Um, yeah, I think that's easily a good enough resume to be top 10 all time. And I thought that there was a really good argument already before this finals to make that case. So he's the best at shooting where points are worth the most. And that's kind of how you win a basketball game, is having more points. So, uh, yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway. I've always been a Steph fan back when he was at Davidson. I have a Davidson jersey that's a Steph jersey. I did not get it out today, but I should have, and I should have put it on. Um,
You should have
but
been
yeah,
wearing that thing.
I'm not gonna lie. I was a little nervous as far. I wasn't nervous that the Warriors weren't gonna win after Game 3 when they went down 2-1. But I was nervous that my prediction would be wrong. But then they won in game four, and you're like, oh, this is actually doable based off of how well they started to play. Um, so yeah, biggest takeaway is Steph is great. I think that people saw that. Had a cold game in game five, didn't matter. That just shows the team effort. So yeah, that's my biggest takeaway. Oh, I guess a next one is that the Celtics can't take care of the basketball. Um, so I think they averaged what was I looked a little over 16 per game, which has kind of been the number that's been haunting them. What were they in the playoffs? Like one and something when they had 16 or more, and had a way better record when they had 15 or less. So um, yeah, they averaged over 16 in a game in the finals, and it killed them. I think the Warriors averaged just over 10 steals per game, which is really high. So yeah.
Um, I definitely agree on the Steph Curry part. Like I think it's hard to listen to any argument of him to not be in the top 10. Like I think that's pretty that would be a tough argue to try to put anybody at least above him, for that top 10 spot. I think that's pretty solidified, especially now that really the only major glamour on his resume is that he didn't have a finals MVP, and that was just kind of like Kevin Durant was there for 2 years. Iggy got it that first title. Not that we don't obviously know how great Steph is, but there is just that little bit of people played better than you in the finals, and you've won 3 rings up to this point. It should be made clear that you are the driving force, and everybody recognizes that, and you're performing in the final series. So yeah, definitely agree on that. Yeah, pretty obvious turnovers. It was pretty bad. Not only as a team, but when you see the head of the snake and Jason Tatum making turnovers in big moments, that's really deflating. I think that shows not only is it tough to see when your best player can't score in big moments, but when they make bad decisions and they seem pretty phased by the defense, that can be rattling to your confidence as a team. You start to scramble and wonder who can we rely on, and then you start to go to options that aren't built into your game plan. And that was big. I think it's hard for me to. I think there's been a standard with Jason Tatum for the last 4 years now that he's been in the league, and he's been to the conference finals. He's made deep playoff runs since the very jump. So I know there's a lot of criticism of him, of he and Brown being able to play together and whatever. I think they're fine together. I just think there's this level of he hasn't made it yet, but most people don't go that deep in the playoffs and they're the star player on that team that early. So I think there's a little bit of, hey, we should remember he's 24. We should remember that he's had a lot of success really early. So anything below a conference finals is kind of a failure for him. And that sets a really high bar that not a lot of people get to that early. But I think all things considered, there's way more analysis that could go into this, but the simplest term I can put it into is like, in my mind, when I watch this finals run, I don't think Jason Tatum has like a dog mentality. Like, I think he does, but I think you see him
Wait, you
shy.
do or you don't?
I thought he did. In watching him in the finals, it's hard for me to say that. I think there's moments. I can tell that got on your skin a little bit. You can rebuttal here in a minute. I think there's moments in a basketball game that really, really show that. Like, you can, for the majority of a game, yeah, you play that. But there was like 3 separate times where it was him and Draymond in a fast break. And there was like, all he was hoping for is to get fouled. Like the most soft finish attempt in the world it wasn't even like, I'm going to try to draw a foul and get the and one. He was just hoping he got fouled. Left it way short, didn't even get above the rim. There's moments where you can tell that, like, from the very jump, they went straight to Al Horford posting up Steph Curry. It was a clear, like, they're their whole game plan was, we're going to bully them. We're going to try to get them in foul trouble. We're going to try to show our size, play defense. And like, that's what they've been doing. That's what they've been great at. But when you're so successful doing that, but then once it starts going well, you go away from your game plan, you start taking stupid shots, and you start hoping for fouls and flailing around. I think that shows just a level of inexperience, a level of, I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, just this level of being soft, of not, yeah, just continuing to follow along with the game plan. Like, it was working. Like, it was, obviously they were hitting shots and like the Warriors weren't. So it's not like their game plan alone was the only reason why they had that 14-2 lead, but it was because they're a bigger team than the Warriors. And that's what it was clear that that was their game plan. They were exploiting it early. And then once the Warriors started heating up, they started to try to match them with outside perimeter play. And that's not what even got them there. So, yeah, I'm not here to say that Tatum doesn't have a dog mentality and he can't be that one day. I think if he doesn't come back from this off season and there's a clear difference in that, then I think it's a different discussion. He's still only 24. Like, he had never been to the finals. Personally, I think I'm not super big on the argument of like, how inexperienced is he, because he's lost like 4 years in a row in like deep playoff pushes. I think like no one's a champion until they're a champion. So like you can't have championship experience until you win it for the first time. So like I don't really buy that all the way, because they've been in deep playoff runs, and you would think that after 4 years of losing in deep playoff runs, you would learn a thing or two from that. And I'm not saying he hasn't, but I think there's just that moment of, like, there are certain moments where you have to be smart and not get turnovers in as a superstar, and it looked like he did that. And then there's moments where you can tell that your shot isn't falling, and you need to find a way to get to the free throw line, go get a bucket, go do something that doesn't feed into the issue of, hey, you're off, and so taking more contested bad shots probably won't help that. So I think this offseason and going into next season is going to be a really big tell. If I were to guess, I would guess that he's going to come back and just like be a completely different person in terms of the way he takes care of the ball and the way that he takes control of the game offensively and defensively, like from a mental standpoint. But anyway, yeah, that's a lot to pull away from a game six, I guess.
No, yeah. I have a couple of thoughts that you made me think about. I Before the playoffs started, I kind of was one to question Tatum's passing ability. Um, in the first three series that they played before the finals, that kind of changed for me. I thought that he was making all of the right decisions. He was getting shown double teams off of screens. He was hitting the short roll. He was hitting the shooter on the weak side with a skip pass, all that. That did not happen nearly as much, in my opinion, during the finals.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did try to make those passes, there was a hand on the ball, a tipped pass. Nothing was really, easy catch and shoot or a clean roll to the basket. So you probably have to credit the Warriors for that with game planning. I think, as far, you mentioned dog mentality a lot. That's a tough thing, I think, because I feel like you he shows spurts of that in certain series. Clearly, that didn't show up in the finals. That wasn't on display at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't agree or disagree necessarily. I'm pretty neutral on that. I've always kind of been a skeptic of Jason Tatum up until these playoffs, I guess. I just thought that the Celtics had a good team all the time, like the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am big on Jaylen Brown, though. I don't think he gets enough credit because of Tatum's stardom. Um, he had a great series, in my opinion, overall, and played really well in Game 6. I would have liked to have seen a lot more maybe go through him, even though a lot already did go through him. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he had like 30 scored in the 30s maybe in game six,
Yeah, it was either
maybe
like 29
34.
or 30, something like it. Yeah,
Oh,
in that
okay.
range.
Okay.
So
So I'd have to look or something. But I thought that he was a tough matchup for the Warriors just throughout the series. So, um,
yeah,
I mean, it's tough to say. I agree with you. I think that they work together. I just don't think that a championship has come of it yet. Um, Another part of that is where was the Celtics bench the latter half of the series?
yeah,
There was so much talk about the Celtics bench throughout the playoffs and guys that were stepping up because they have a pretty short rotation,
mhm.
um, eight basically, maybe nine deep depending on who they're playing against. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, they didn't really help a lot over the latter half of the series, unlike the Warriors, um, who had multiple guys step up off the bench. Poole, Peyton, Looney didn't start, some of the games, played well throughout the whole playoffs. So, um, yeah, I don't know. It's just it was really cool to see. I was having this conversation with my cousin. It's really cool to see on the flip side, not talking about the Celtics anymore. I feel like we are definitely witnessing history in basketball, and it's been awesome to watch um, the Warriors dynasty, basically. I think that's something that a lot of people, whether you like the Warriors or not, will look back and be like, man, that was really cool. Um, Steph has changed the game of basketball, and they have built from within, basically, except when they had Kevin Durant. But their core has been the same. Those three guys have been the same, and they were all drafted there. And I think that's really cool to see. Um, Four championships in 8 years. That's awesome. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think some people maybe take it for granted. I think a lot of people are kind of aware too of what's going on, but I think it needs to be appreciated also, just from like an organization standpoint. They've been great.
for sure. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, but just like um, whether or not if you're a Warriors fan, if you're a basketball fan, you're a fan of how they play,
Hmm.
move the ball. Um, I mean, really ball movement. That's like probably the biggest thing. Like how many off ball moves. Um, it's obviously star centered, but you look at the list of how many different star players that they've had on their team and how much of an issue that becomes in other organizations of who gets the ball, how many touches and whatever. But it's just like, well, if you keep moving the ball, it's going to find the best position to shoot. And you know, it just so happens to be there's a lot of shooters and there's a lot of great players that fit perfectly in that system. So it continues to work. And then on the other side, like their defense is unbelievable. Like it's something that, obviously Steph isn't known to be a two-way player or whatever, but if you really watch, like that dude played hard, like defensively, and he obviously has his limitations, like with his size and something that they tried to exploit. The last few games when they were just looking for that switch, just look for the bigger person just to go get Steph inside. But even then, he's so smart about taking charges. They're smart about rotating guys down to help, either from the top or the bottom side, whatever it may be. Their defensive and offensive system just breeds success, and you can plug and play so many guys in it. And that's what's scary moving forward. Is like you look at their team, and obviously like Draymond's obviously on like the back half of his career. And there's moments where it's like, you know, there was a lot of stuff in question like in the final series. I don't think he necessarily played that bad. He has a specific role and whatever. But you look at the youth in that team, like obviously the top three guys stay there. Steph, Clay, and Dre, and like that's the nucleus of everything. But they're surrounded by so many really young, like perfect like basketball like athletes, like the prototype athlete that you want, with a 6'8", long, lanky, really athletic wing, and like that's what they have all over the place.
They
um,
draft well, that's for sure.
They draft well. They ended up, they got Wiggins, which obviously proved to be a huge piece for them in the series. And then with that Wiggins trade, they also got the pick to get Wiseman, which we haven't really seen yet. Hopefully, like health wise, like he pans out and everything works out there. But yeah, it's really going to come down to, and honestly, it's weird to say this, and this is, I don't know if I'm speaking ahead of terms, but when Poole is in there and Curry is out, is it not really, really like obvious that Curry's played a huge role in how he's developed? Like they look so similar in the way that they move, in the way that they get their shots, in the way that he knows to lean in when the ball's going in, and he knows when to keep it moving when it's not. And like just that, it's just eerily similar when you watch them play. And it's as obvious as, they have a somewhat similar play style, but when you get to watch Steph Curry every day in practice and you get to be around it all the time, and it's clear that this is a group that is confidence building in their young players, and they want their young players to do well. Yeah, it's which kind of goes back to what you're saying about like the Celtics bench versus the Warriors bench, and just kind of how the role players played. I was honestly kind of shocked at how bad they played at home, the Celtics, because that's usually where role players tend to step up, feed off the crowd, and so they feel most comfortable, and that's when they usually have their biggest impact. And usually on the road, you kind of have to lean on your star players to kind of make it happen. But it was so obvious that whenever, rotation guys for the Celtics went in, it got ugly quick. And then there was it was like the 9-minute mark in the fourth quarter when, Curry kind of had some foul trouble and he went out, and the Celtics were starting to like kind of build up over the run. They cut it to like 10 or whatever. And it's at those moments where it's like, all right, this is where, Curry's out and they can't really afford to put him back in right now and risk another foul. They need to rest him for that last, 7-minute run to the finals. And it was just this moment of like, they can't stop the Warriors defensively because their system just keeps working. It creates open looks, and they were hitting, and even when they weren't hitting, like, because of how much of a threat they are from outside, there's easy looks inside where it looks so difficult for the Celtics to score in every way. But even with Curry out, you would think, okay, this is where the Celtics make their push. This is where, hey, it's going to get interesting. We're going to get a close final ending. But the Warriors just kept producing. They kept that, and that's all you really ask out of your bench is like, hey, if we have a lead, keep it, and don't let it dwindle. Just keep it where it's at. You don't always. It's unrealistic to expect your rotation players to come in and really extend this lead. That's not really. Obviously, that's ideal, but it's never really expected, especially in the NBA, especially in the finals. And so all you can really ask for them is to maintain that 8 to 10 point lead, and they did. And that had to have been deflating for the Celtics to say, hey, Curry's out, now's our time. But they can't. They're using all their energy to just maintain that 8 to 10 point deficit. And so that's just a huge credit to the Warriors. It's a huge credit to their coaching staff and to their players. I mean, a big story was Iguodala not playing this series. He's obviously older, at the very end of his career, but there's so many times where he's up there like yelling at dudes, and it's always different when it comes from a player. Like we, as players, you get yelled at from coaches all the time, and obviously coaches have been there, they've done that, they're coaches for a reason in the league, so like you should always listen to them, but it always comes across differently when it's from a player and from a vet. So you see guys like UD on the Heat, like so important to that team, even though they don't play or get like the last minute of the game or whatever. But even like Gary Payton had like a just kind of a dumb foul, and it was a few minutes left in the game, and it wasn't even just like he was calling out to Gary Payton the second to like, hey, correct him. It's like, no, come here, like let me talk to you for a minute. Like you don't do that. Like it's not over. Like it's all that type of stuff where that's what is going to make the Warriors dynasty so great, is that they're going to leave a legacy that way, where now, whenever Iguodala is done and gone, guys like Gary Payton who, obviously like played great and is clearly bought into the Warriors system. There's plenty of times where he caught it wide open on the wing, and to think that someone like Gary Payton can't hit a wide open shot is ridiculous. But he knows the system. He understands that it works. He understands that that's how they've got to their fourth championship. And now, whenever he's playing down the line, he can look at another young guy and say, "Hey, like we don't do this stupid stuff here. We buy into the system. We play smart. We make sure that no lead is like big enough for us until the buzzer goes off." And then that's how legacies are built.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of good points. Um, Two things that I want to comment on that you mentioned. One is I would tend to believe that the Warriors were okay with switching Curry onto Horford. In fact, some possessions he just started on Horford. I think that's part of their overall game plan to stop Tatum. Like make Al Horford do something. There was there was one possession that I actually laughed about when they showed the replay. Al Horford backed Curry down, had an opportunity to lay it in, literally lay it in, and he kicked it out.
Yeah, I
It's
remember that
like
one.
make him play back to the basket because Horford doesn't play a lot of back to the basket. He's a lot of pick and pop,
Mm-hmm.
um, diving down the lane. He's a pretty good slasher, honestly, for being his position. Um, so I think that was just part of the Warriors' game plan. And there was also another play in Game Six where Horford got an and one and like flexed to the crowd, right? And Draymond in the background is laughing. I just think that the Warriors had this mindset of um, make him beat us because he's not going to take advantage of a smaller mismatch like people think he should. Um, and Horford's a really good player. Don't get me wrong. I just think that that was part of the game plan, and I think they were okay with that. Um, the other thing too is, and I've been guilty of this in the past of questioning Andrew Wiggins, but need to remember that being the number one pick, he was involved in a trade that sent Kevin Love to Cleveland, and that's when he got put in Minnesota. If Andrew Wiggins wasn't a part of that trade, I guarantee that he would not be considered a bust because he would have been playing in Cleveland with Kyrie and LeBron, and they probably would have been in the finals, and he wouldn't have had that title. That's just what I think. And so he's also only like 27 years old. So to have a title and to be an NBA All Star within your first like 8 or 9 years or whatever it is to be in the league, that's also, I don't know, you could consider it's too early to say that he was a number one pick that was a bust or whatever. Um, Clearly, he had a really good season. He earned an All Star spot. Should he be an All Star starter? I don't think so myself. Um, but he had a lull after the All Star break where people were like, yeah, he definitely shouldn't have been. And then he was great in the playoffs. The dude literally does whatever he needs to do for them to win. He rebounds the basketball. He definitely guarded Tatum the best of anyone who did or tried to throughout the playoffs. And he's opportunistic with his shot making and shot taking ability. I think that he passed up a couple of wide open threes in Game Six that he usually doesn't. And they flashed over to the sideline, and Kerr was like, "That's two in a row that he hasn't shot." So like they want him to take those shots. They want him to be confident. I think it's sometimes a confidence thing with him. Um, but dude, he made highlight plays throughout the whole playoffs, dunking
Yeah.
on Luka, being the top defender against the other team's number one option, knocking down open threes. Because there's a lot of games that Clay was cold, Poole was pretty inconsistent. I think some of the most consistent guys besides Steph were Wiggins and Looney because you knew what you were going to get out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them to exceed those expectations that are put on them, I think was really cool to see. Uh, but people forget, and Andrew Wiggins probably wouldn't have been considered a bust if he wasn't part of that trade. He went to Minnesota, for goodness sake, who was terrible. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I think you have to look at that kind of stuff with a lens of like the whole picture, um, because the NBA, it's not just about like the games and results and stats. People forget that these are businesses and organizations that have offices, and the players are obviously the most important part of that. But they're basically they're employees,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're analyzing employees here, guys that are getting paid to play basketball, which is, you know, probably the coolest job in the world, in my opinion. So, um, yeah, it's pretty interesting to you mentioned talking heads at the beginning. Everyone can be a critic, right? So, I don't know. It's just cool. I think there's a lot of cool storylines that go with the Warriors winning this year, for sure.
For sure. Yeah, and to touch on the bus thing really quick, I think kind of like you were saying, like we forget that these are just like at the end of the day, like obviously the salaries are very different and it's like a very
Mm-hmm.
different type of work environment, but they are just employees at the end of the day. And I think really anybody who can remain a legitimate starter in the league, I think it's hard to call anybody a bust, even if they had higher expectations or people thought it was going to work out different. Like you said, he's 27. Like for him to figure, and like, is it too hard to imagine that when you come in as a number one pick and you then get a lot of money and you're playing the NBA, like you might need a little bit of time to adjust to like your
Right.
lifestyle and how you live, and like some people take it really well and some people don't, and it's like I don't know. Obviously, like we can never know what happened, and it's not like he ever was terrible. Like he was just really inconsistent, and yeah, he played for a terrible organization. Like what's the big deal? He gets to a stable organization. I think there's a balance of like saying that he completely resurrected his career. It's like he's like the third or fourth option on a really really good team. And not to take away anything from him, but I think a lot of people would really succeed in his position there. Um, not to obviously this is coming across the wrong way, but really not to take away from him. But on the flip side, like he number one pick, 26, 27. And at this point, it's hard to say that he wouldn't start on most, if not all, teams in the NBA. It's hard
Yeah,
to
he would start on probably every team.
right. So I think any idea of calling him a bust is ridiculous because of the expectations of a number one. Anyway, like you said, there's a lot of talking heads, a lot of critics. There's not a lot of podcasts who are accountable as we are. You know, that's what we're gonna be moving forward.
I just
Uh,
don't think it's been celebrated enough that I was right, and
you're right.
I am probably the only undefeated analyst in the world right now. 1-0, might not ever guess again.
I was gonna say, should we
Um,
retire the podcast, or should we just retire from making picks now? We can't do that. I'm gonna continue to make picks because I'm 0-1 as far as firm predictions. So we're gonna keep doing it, whatever that looks like in the future. But anyway, thank you for listening in on our 10th episode of the Player to Coach Pod, also known as our finals recap and our accountability podcast. Thanks for tuning in.